welcome. Thank you for taking space and time to engage with our video. We're doing this as individuals. Myself, Olivia, you and Emily came together, and we believe that this is a piece in the puzzle of the work in fighting and stepping out of systems of oppression. We believe that ableism is a system of oppression that too often hasn't even made the table on the agenda. So just to say that what we're sharing could be emotionally distressing for some of you and triggering. So take care of yourself. I invite you to have an open mind and an open heart, and to stay connected mentally as well as emotionally to what we're sharing in the interest of it being transformational. Emily's put in a lot of emotional labour into this, and I've personally taken it as a painful gift from a critical friend, and I invite you to do the same. So thank you, Emily.
Thanks, Olivia. Yeah. So, before we start, actually, I'm going to tell you a wee bit about myself before we jump in. I'm Emily. I am going to be the speaker of this event, and really, what spurred this, or one of the major things that spurred it, is since as a child, I've been very aware of the climate and ecological collapse. I mean, at the age of 6, I came running into the kitchen and crying about the trees getting cut down and everything, because David Attenborough was actually doing a piece actually back then about humans affecting the planet. And my family were like, "You're too young to worry about that." And from then, it kind of grew and grew. So when XR kind of did its actions in April, I kind of felt, right, finally someone's doing something about it. And sadly, when I got in, the more barriers experienced, issues with accessibility, issues with acceptance of my neurobehavioural stuff, the more I began to realise that there's issues with this movement. That means that I feel not welcome and actually seen as a nuisance, which we talked about later on, and that's really upsetting me. So that's a wee bit about me, and I'm a snake lover, political activist, as you can see on screen. What is the aim of today? We have no aim. Well, fuck you. Yes, I got Tourette's. In case you're wondering. To gain real understanding of what disability means for people, namely activists, structural oppression, and othering within our society. So that means understanding how disabled people are othered, dehumanized, and seen as basically non-humans, candidates for humanity. Basically, they're not quite human. They need work done on them to become fully human or functional, which I'll explain later on in this talk. To become emotionally connected to this issue, to feel moved and seen it as a human problem as well, within the movement of humanizing us, and to see it in a real way, ongoing deep work on this issue, kind of carve a fair transformation of a society and for change. In other words, you can't really talk about every other discrimination and then leave us out, because then that's A, unfair, and B, it's just basically further reinforcing othering. Gain knowledge are case studies around disability discrimination in the clean movement, which would be very hard for a lot of people to hear, but it's actually needed. We need to hold the mirror up and keep ourselves accountable for these actions and feelings and ideological issues on people that are disabled within the movement, otherwise it won't get sorted. To develop a critical ability to think more broadly and closely about environmental issues, rather than being on the most common and most socially acceptable oppressions for whatever reason, and leaving out the more uncomfortable and more difficult and emotionally difficult things to deal with out of the table for whatever reason. And to have some laughs and connect with others, because I actually do have a sense of humour. It's not going to be all doom, gloom, and all the rest of it. We will have some laughs and some giggles moving forward. What do you know about disability? Do you think, and these are a couple of questions that it's not going to be a quiz. It's not going to be anything like that. Relax. Don't get afraid. But these are questions I want you to think about as we progress through it. So if you want a notepad or anything else, it's fine, to kind of think about and monitor how you feel about things as we go on, as information and my personal experiences and other things, how you feel in the beginning of this talk and how you feel in the middle of this talk and then near the end of the talk of some of these questions, doubts, things of that nature. What are you thinking and feeling looking at me? Fuck. Thinking what's going on, medicalizing. How do you find this disability? Worrying about how I should react to her, how I should be seen reacting to her on this call. Feeling uncomfortable, and maybe even ask why, or maybe you've not noticed until it's been pointed out. How many disabled people do you know personally? Now, this is a personal question. You're not going to be asked about it, but these things you need to ask yourself. How many famous disabled people can you name, excluding Stephen Hawking, because everyone knows Stephen Hawking? How many people are classed as disabled in the UK? And what proportion of them are living in poverty? Now that's out of the way, and hopefully you've noted that down. Don't worry, we can come back to this later on if people need to. Now, before we move on to the meat and potatoes, we need to kind of understand and think and actually ask who and what are we actually talking about here. We can't just talk about an abstraction. We need to actually define our terms for those who do not actually know what disability is and how it's actually defined legally and societally and all the rest of it. And then we can then talk about how people are affected by it. So we're going to be using the UN and the Equality Act definition of a disabled person. Now, the Equality Act basically is any impairment or condition which affects you for 12 months and affects your daily living and life. So that means any condition that has any effect on your life of a normal life, like eating, cooking, going to work, socializing, things of that nature. But it's not implied. It's more like your physical function. As for the UN one, which is basically a condition or impairment which lasts for 12 months but also affects having social oppression and social issues of integration, as well as issues of daily living. So it's more not just the person but also about societal issues in terms of access and issues with that. So I'm glad it kind of touches on that. So when we're talking about disability, that's the definitions I'll be talking about, and it'll be more clear as we go into the further into this moving forward. Now, my literal brain thinks when we see models, we see this. No, we're not talking about supermodels. We're talking about models of thought, models of like the model of relativity. That's a model of how the world actually works. So we're going to be talking about 4 models which actually affect disabled people in the modern day, past and present as well. The eugenics model, being systemically treated treatment of disabled people and the kind of origins of what we think about as disability, getting treated in society, and dealt with as a problem to society. The medical model, the most understood model and pervasive, and what that represents for disabled people and for us as people in general in society. The charity model is explaining why it's a model of pity and disempowerment and how it affects people's values and outlook on disabled people. It has a PR branch and a branch actually of the medical model. And the social model and how that's actually made about disabled people for disabled people and political and economic activism moving forward and actually how it empowered disabled people. So we'll unpack these models and highlight their inherent inadequacy and injustice. And also, sorry if we go quick through some of them with a lot of information. It's just as a bit of a crash course, but it's to give you an understanding of past and present issues. This is where things get a bit dark, and I am a wee bit sorry for this, but we need to kind of look at the deep darkness of what has happened in the past, so we don't repeat them, and so that we don't ingest the values. What is eugenics model? The mindset. What is it? What actually is this? Well, it's the idea and notion in philosophy or ideology, whatever you want to call it, of undesirable physical and social characteristics should be bred out of human race with eugenics. In fact, eugenics, actually, people that proposed it, like Francis Galton and others, termed the word normal. In fact, the word normal people, abnormal people, fit, unfit, undeserving, and inferior were popularized and made. In fact, the word normal did not even exist till the 1860s, until this kind of mindset was sweeping across Europe and America. It's a framework that characterizes disability as we know it today. It's actually got a lot of echoes of a lot of things been going on. The basic logical theory of eugenics is that either people fit or unfit, and unfit need to be either sterilized or killed outright in extreme cases. The theory posits that if every effort should be made to increase all elements of genetic inferiority from the human race until they no longer exist, and I mean any means necessary. This categorization led to foundations for how we understand people and disabled or non-disabled people today. Euthanasia is a term that actually got termed by the eugenics movement for today, and there's recent studies that it recently has been coming out of, like, aborting babies. Such a case of Alabama mum actually suing the state for a false negative on Down syndrome baby, and it's actually, the whole case was actually called an unjust birth. If that doesn't sound kind of Nazi-esque, I don't know what would. That was in 2005, by the way. The New Malthusian doctrine that some people basically deserve resources and some don't, and that people that do die are defective anyway. That's nature's way of weeding them out. So it's also neo-Darwinian. And so that's the quote here: some people are a burden on the rest. That's what it says here on the left-hand side. Now, the right-hand side here, one here, only healthy seed must be sown. That's actually by the London Eugenics Society. You can see the link. Obviously, people would know that there's an issue here, that of Nazism and stuff like that. That there's a campaign I joined called Black Triangle, because in Nazi Germany we had the Black Triangle on us, and we were the first to die in the T4 program. And not many people know about this, and I point this out because it's the 75th anniversary, that we were tested and experimented on and exterminated in Nazi Germany. Why don't you know that? Why don't you know that we're part of the Nazi extermination program? You might know the Roma people were. You might know maybe Jews, and Jews obviously, and gays and some other people that communists or unionists. But why don't you know that the first victims of the Holocaust were disabled? Why is it not talked about? Why is it hushed? Who keeps that there? And this is where we talk about the medical model. Now, the medical model is basically an outgrowth to be more politically correct and palatable than eugenics model. There was a lot of pushback. There was a lot of pushback and basically people fighting it legally and socially. So the medical model was formed in the early 20th century. The medical model sees disability as a medical issue with the person. And the goal is to normalize people, there's that word again, normal, to a society, so socially and politically acceptable standard of normal for the time and place, such as hysteria is a good example, which was sexist and was actually a medical diagnosis for women in the infancy of psychiatry in the 1900s, and the tail end of eugenics. So any women that were suffragettes were called hysterical and actually diagnosed hysterical and some of them put in mental institutions. There was a lot of women that are unmarried, there's women that don't want children, there's women that were seen as just women that shouldn't be, themselves fighting against the patriarchy, would be labelled hysteria. So there's a medical model coming in to correct an abnormal person. There's actually a value system going on here. And another great example that a lot of people know is homosexuality being seen as a mental illness. In fact, it's so ridiculous that in the 1970s, it was still classed as a mental illness, and even though it was decriminalised, and in Sweden, they actually claim benefits. They were sick with the gay. They would actually phone up and say, "I'm sick with the gay." That actually happened. I've got the article. And it got so bad they actually had to close that and decriminalise it because they were taking the piss out of people, because they would literally phone up and going, "Yeah, I'm not feeling great. I'm fancying a man at the moment. So I've got the gay, so I can't come to work," and they'll get paid for it. So as we know, it was medicalised for religious and political reasons, not because there's anything inherently wrong with being gay. And so it was seen as sin and abnormal, and that drove what was seen as medically necessary to correct. So this is the idea of politicalisation and values and norms guiding the medical model. Now, there's two sides of it. There's a side of, if you break your leg or get ill with some kind of disease, you want to go back to the state you were before. That's different. That's reparative medicalisation. This is different. This is, you are disordered, you are broken, you are fucked up in whatever way, and you need to be like everyone else. The way you are, the way your mind, body is wrong. You can't accept it as it is, and you need to actually be like everyone else for your own good, as a moralistic argument as well. Next slide, please. So this is one that's going to be quite controversial. Charities are not your friend. They are a quasi-business, and they actually speak over disabled people and actually reinforce negative stereotypes and disempower disabled people. I'm sorry to say, but that's actually the fact of the matter. And this is run by disabled people, for disabled people. They reinforce a whole host of values about disabled people or people with illnesses and I remember, to give you an example of like how insidious it is, we don't see it, it's normalised. I was in a bus in Ayrshire, and I saw a poster like, "Stop thief." Like, what's this? My first thought is, well, I paid for my ticket, I'm not a thief. But it was about arthritis. This sort of like, "Stop thief." Oh yes, it's a life thief. And I thought, donate now. And I thought, there's no political side of it. There's no lack of resources, lack of social care, and all the rest of it. It's we to cure it. Well, what happens? You can't be cured. What happens to all that money? And there are examples of reinforcing pity, us being disempowered. We need someone needs to help us. Someone needs to take care of us. The paternalistic kind of, we are like children to be taken care of. If we can't get taken care of by the state, we have to be taken care of by charity. In fact, handicap actually comes from the word handicap, begging. People begging for charity. If you're disabled on the streets like a beggar to survive. He'd love to walk away from this poster too. Muscular dystrophy. Now, that is the kind of idea of look at this poor soul, he's in a wheelchair, give money. It's manipulating people's values, and basically this is where most people see disability. This is where most people see in the media, is this kind of rhetoric. You know, the poor soul and they're suffering and they suffer from X, Y, and Z, and they're doing this and that. It's about the person or the poor soul. You know, so you know what? It's a really hard life. Da, 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 da. And any political, social, or economics situations or things that compound it, or like I said before, lack of access to healthcare if you can't afford it, like in America, you're screwed. But no, we need to screw it. And we need to ask, who is this for? This is for non-disabled people. This is not for disabled people. This is for non-disabled people. Help us. Give us money. You know, pat us in the back. You know, and this kind of mindset is actually more insidious. So this is where we get into the nice nitty-gritty stuff, which is the social model. Now, this is the only model that's not imposed onto disabled people, but actually made by disabled people. It is authored by disabled people and by our needs, not what society needs with a charity model, medical model, and a eugenics model of really destroying us, bending us until we're socially acceptable, or seen as its charity case of people's emotional and social means of feeling okay about us having a hard life. The social model talks about barriers, so it's an impairment, the condition, interacting with the society, disability. So the notion is that the condition is independent from the disability. Disability is a social, political construct put on top of us, right? Having a condition does not make you disabled automatically. And as you can see here, the medical model, her impairment is the problem, they should cure her or give her prosthetics. The stairs is the problem, they should build a ramp. Social model. Even if you got temporary injury, the social model still works. Because how can you live in a society where it's stairs or it's inaccessible? How can you have any semblance of a life when you can't even access those problems? So the social model talks about political issues, social issues, economic issues, you know, for example, attitudes, prejudice, stereotyping, discrimination, you know, inaccessible buildings, language, services not being built for us, have been cut back, communication issues, organizations being for non-disabled people, not for disabled people, in fact, not for, you know, and not for people with impairments, and then getting disabled by that, by society, by structures, value systems, and all the rest of it. And they get inflexible in the processes and practices, and we get excluded. That's what disablism actually is, or disability / disablism, whichever we refer, is we're excluded from society because of our impairments, not being adjusted for and accommodated. And that's where the problems actually lies. And we're actually not that disabled if those are taken care of. And there's case studies for that, actually. One case study is an island off the coast of Manhattan that had a deaf community, and every third person was deaf due to a genetic inheritance, and everyone knew sign language. And it was so normalised, there was no barriers. They would talk and do sign language at the same time. They would only experience problems when they went outside into the mainland where no one knew sign language and no one knew how to communicate with them. That's when they became disabled, because in that island they were taken account of. And that's where disability is something on top of an impairment. Impairment is they can't hear. Disability is the society on the mainland that couldn't adapt and cope with them as deaf people versus on the island. And it's actually a case study. Now I mentioned disablism / ableism. Now we need to kind of define our terms, and I'm sorry we're going to go into this, but define our terms. Ableism, or disablism, whatever we prefer, potato, is a system that places value on people's bodies, minds, based on society constructed ideas of normalcy, intelligence, and excellence. These constructed ideas of normalcy, intelligence, and excellence are deeply rooted in anti-blackness, eugenics, we just discussed, and capitalism. This form of systemic oppression leads to people and society determining who is viable for work and functioning of society, and whose worth based on people's appearance or their ability to satisfy, produce, excel, or behave, aka behave in the roles and values of that particular given society and time. You do not have to be disabled to experience disablism/ableism. So the study done, they went out in the streets and asked people what is ableism/disablism. And only 2 out of 10 people could actually name what it actually was, either heard of it, or even define what it is. This is the world I'm living in. Many of you know what homophobia is, or racism, or sexism, transphobia, and all the rest of it. But I live in a world where the very name, the very description of my oppression, and I mean that literally, my oppression, and abuse by society is not in people's mindsets. It's not on the radar. Why is that? Why is that? Because people see it as a medical problem, not as a social political problem. It's like seeing black people, they're not fucked up because of society. If they were whiter, they wouldn't have that problem. It's a problem of blackness, and that's actually the roots of eugenics and the medicalization of black people as well, actually, of normalizing blackness into being white as well. So you've got racism stemming from this as well. Next slide, please. This is also going to be controversial, because I'm not your fucking inspiration. I'm not inspirational for having Tourette's or in other conditions I've got, and due to my neurology and mental health stuff. So this is the problem. Never ignore somebody with a disability. You don't realize how much they can inspire you. Does that seem condescending to you? Does that seem weird? Would it be weird if I said, never ignore a Jew? You don't realize how much they can inspire you. Would we accept that if it was another minority like that? I give that an example. Your excuse is invalid. And the one I hate with every fibre of my being, the only disability in life is a bad attitude. If you say so, dear. Now, this is a problem because where do blooming start? Basically, this here is called inspiration porn, and porn is inherently objectifying. So it's basically objectifying inspiration by disabled people, quantified as petty objects or pity objects. And this is a lot of it stems from the charity model, feeds into this as well. For non-disabled people's feelings, to make sure that it's not them to blame. It's actually it's a thing for people being successful disabled people overcoming their disability. And they're called supercrips. They hold up like Stephen Hawking and others of why can't you be like that? And ignoring the privilege and class privilege and other things like that actually make them go like that. A lot of disabled people don't actually have. Disabilities are considered a tragedy. Society needs to take care and protect persons with a disability. So they take care of themselves, they have no autonomy, we need to act upon them because they're poor souls that need us. And if someone with a disability achieves something that a normal person does, then the person has overcome their disability and their inspiration for what a person can do, non-disabled or disabled. It puts unreasonable expectations on somebody. It's looked at as inspirational, the supercrip, explaining, and the fact is that it's basically commodifying disabled people's suffering and packaging it up to, inspire non-disabled people to try harder at life and no problems insurmountable. And no one thinks about what if you actually are that fucking disabled person struggling in society and with your conditions. Like, who do you aspire to? An alien? This is often mixed up with the charity model, where things are inspiring stories, news, and telethons and charities, organisations, about how well they've done helping disabled people. Do you think I've made inspiration doing this talk because of my capacity, my articulation, my knowledge, my understanding, or is it despite my disability? And really, do you understand the difference? Ever said, wow, you did good considering you're black, gay, women. You're such an inspiration. Would that be insulting to you? If you can see it in that example, why can't you see? Are you having issues seeing it in the disability example, and why? Would that offend you if someone said that to you? Now we're going to get into it. So actually quite a funny story actually. The one on the left, I was in with a disability group, and my friend was rolling up a smoke for the break, for lunch. And I saw that she had this packet, and I saw that, and I'm like, what the hell? And I had to take a photo of it. Smoking causes strokes and disability. That's lovely, and you can see I'm miserable because all disabled people are miserable supposedly. And me laughing is supposedly not an actual thing. I'm just fake laughing because I'm supposed to be miserable. And that is supposed to scare you from smoking, because otherwise you become like one of us. You become disabled. And that we can't have that. And on the right, I saw this on Twitter where someone actually basically found that at a bar with thinking of the consequences of drinking and driving, and it's someone in a wheelchair. So it's that idea of being a scare tactic of, oh, be careful or you be disabled, and you don't want to be disabled because all the above narratives I've just briefly described. So how would that make you feel? Imagine you had something, this drug can make you gay. Be careful, this can make you gay. Right? We'd be offended by that. This idea of a scare tactic of, yeah, maybe true, but it's the narrative behind it. It's not a neutral where it's like this may cause, you can cause people injury or death. Don't drink and drive. It's you can make someone disabled. Or the second one is you could be disabled. Don't do it. It's not adverse health effects. It's you'll be disabled. Don't do it. You'll be miserable like this woman. Is the narrative, it's the context of the message. The content of the message is the problem. And could have done it another way? Yes. Could have done it in a way that's not offensive? Yes. But they use it that way because they pull on values and norms to get a reaction, an emotional reaction out of people, and that reinforces social ideas about disability. And this is a major problem because, like I said before, disability is seen as a tragedy, and you don't want to be a tragedy. You don't want society and your family to deal with you because of your choices. The narratives of the scrounger / money thief. Many of you may have, I may not have seen things of this nature. Even if you've not seen the Daily Mail, you might have actually seen front page. Even if you don't read it, you might see this on the stand if you're going to into a corner shop or some other shop. It doesn't mean you read it. But this influences a lot of people. It's drip, drip, drip. That's actually fake. That's actually the one on the left, the Daily Mail, is actually fake news. The DWP is the Department of Work and Pensions for the UK for benefits and welfare. They actually did an examination, and 0.5% of all benefit claimants are false. And actually they get more more claims of people falsely accusing people of being on benefits illegally than actually real ones. So that figure is actually false and scaremongering, just like it's scaremongering in other groups. But this is particularly pernicious, of scaring and seeing people as money thieves for the spurters, where we've got nothing to contribute and we're stealing from the state. That's your, you know. And related note, it's very ominous that on the right-hand side here we've got from Nazi Germany, which is a picture from 1938, which reads that 60 Reichsmarks is what this person suffering from a hereditary defects cost the people's community during his lifetime. Fellow citizens, that is your money too. You can see the kind of thing of the money scroungers are stealing money, they're not really sick, they're stealing state money for being disabled, and the Nazis going, you know what, they're stealing money from the state for taking care of them. There's a very fine line between that and going into this whole person is a waste of money, waste of resources, it should be gone. Very fine line. And we're starting to see that right now. And of course, for shits and giggles, the hypocrisy of it all is you've got Rees-Mogg, and we can't have people loafing about doing nothing, expecting the state to finance their lifestyles. So you've got them attacking me and other disabled people for being scroungers and getting something for nothing, and here's got Rees-Mogg napping in the middle of Parliament, getting paid £300 a day to do so. That's basically almost some people's entire monthly, benefits, and some people that's a week's wage, and it's just sitting there doing bugger all for one day. So it's okay if they do it, but if they're allowed to scrounge and do stuff like that, but we need to police people that are disabled of how disabled they are, so they don't get a meager amount from the state. So it's like, and it makes it that being disabled is an economic calculation rather than seen as valuable. We're seen as cost-benefit analysis of you keeping you alive. How would that make you feel if you had that? Of how valuable are you economically to keep you alive and keep you fed and have money and to survive? How would that make you feel? Of that narrative like that's been going on for 10 years under the Tories. You're not worth the money. Next slide, please. To the disabled people advocate for themselves. Basically, because of all mentioned above, another shit we've got to deal with, we realised in the 1970s, 60s and 70s that the only people that will advocate for us is ourselves and sometimes even our friends and family. No one else really cared, or they would feed off us the charity model and the medical model as cash cows. Remember, the medical model is the medical establishment is a for-profit establishment. An excellent book on that is actually The Medicalisation of Society. So, what happened? Well, the fact is that we get less representation in everyday media than black people in the 1970s. Only seen as inspiration for able people are pity and contempt. And that's why we're seen in media and movies most of the time. We're not normalised as a news anchor or a presenter or anything else. We're excluded from all of that from being seen. And we're invisible in the news that affects our lives and ignored by most mainstream discourse. And what I mean by that is that it's seen as a niche issue that's not part of the mainstream anti-oppression, social justice, whatever you want to call it, group. It is very much seen as a niche political niche issue because people see it as a medical issue, or people see it as a mix of charity and medical issue, and therefore there's no political / economic issues to be dealt with. And it makes people uncomfortable. We have someone in emotion rolling in because of the inherent disablism and ableism in our society. We don't want to deal with disabled people, but rather they were gone. They don't exist. Basically, and this is the problem. Us protesting the civil rights movement, all the rest of it. For an excellent film recently on Netflix, it's called Crip Camp, even though it's based in America, about our invisible struggles to exist to be allowed to live, to exist in society. And that, to me, my personal opinion, takes it one step closer of us being destroyed out of society, rather society may not us not exist at all, wiped from the face of the earth, and that be seen as a good idea. Or we're seen as vulnerable and we can't possibly advocate for ourselves, and caregivers and parents talk over us. And we're often suffered in silence and neglected by society. It's seen as a nasty topic on the news. Does it not sell newspapers? Does it make people uncomfortable? And why is that? In fact, another problem I've had personally is whenever I bring it up, I get or even mention it, I get shut down and asked to leave, or being told that I'm doing whataboutism. That is the idea that when you talk about a topic, people go, "What about X? What about Y?" And sometimes it's used to deflect or move away from a problem or situation. When in this case, is actually, why are you talking about this, even when it affects disabled people, like COVID-19? And Stephen Hawking is seen as amazing, or as he well known because he's disabled. Would he get the same publicity if he was a quote-unquote normal professor out of a prestigious university? I don't think so. Or is it because you've got a brilliant mind? Or has he got a brilliant mind despite his disabilities? Is he becoming like threads here? And this is where it really begins to hit home. Disability, 84% of all disabilities in the UK are acquired. And there is actually 1/5 of all people in the UK are considered disabled. That's 13 million people. 1 in 5 have some kind of disability under the Equality Act definition I just described in the beginning of this talk. The perniciousness of, and actually the destruction of services by austerity and the narrative that's been pushed out by the Tory government, the Conservative government in the UK, has made a toxic cocktail of a situation. And I've been watching this situation quite thoroughly. And basically, disability is missing. We're seen as vulnerable people, which is euphemism actually. I went from, underlying health conditions to vulnerable people. But we're seen as expected losses. We're seen as, and we've had do not resuscitate orders given to people who have, seen as a bad lifestyle or not a good lifestyle or quality of life based on the perceived burden of themselves. People with autism, Down syndrome, things like that, not because of any actual assessment, but because they're seen as, well, they've got a bad life anyway, because of the bigotry, as far as, of society viewing people as worthless. And this blanket do not resuscitates of whole institutions. A case in Perth, actually, of a whole care home for people that are autistic getting a blanket do not resuscitate. That means if something happens, you go COVID-19, you will not get resuscitated at all. That's just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, I can go into the fact that disabled people actually had to fight NICE and the British Medical Journal and NHS to actually reverse the blanket do not resuscitate orders and get a review on that, because sometimes people would actually get it on their archives and it would be on their record and they wouldn't even know. The case of a boy who got a phone call asking them to, because they're autistic, to agree to a do not resuscitate order, and he was 15. That actually happened. The fact is that disabled people's supports have been actually denied treatment in the United States and the UK for being disabled because, they're seen as bed blockers and they're seen as not priority. That's right, not priority. Imagine having that, being told that you're not priority because you're disabled. How would it make you feel if you're sick, but suddenly you're a second-class citizen or third-class citizen? You won't get treatment like everyone else. And pulling supports. But here's the most insidious thing of all, is that bill about mental health, mental legislation, and all the rest of it. The Mental Health Act, we've got mental health issues. Where have you actually heard that on the media about the Mental Health Act of vulnerable people being locked up indefinitely under the Mental Health Act, but getting sectioned? And of course, something that many people don't realise, what if you got hit of COVID-19 and what if you actually had a problem with when you got infected, long-term health condition? Your lungs got holes in them, blood clots, heart issues, brain issues, like neurologically. They were studying it all. Overnight, you acquired an impairment. How would it make you feel if you had to deal with everything I've just talked about? How would you feel if suddenly being ignored, jumping deep head first into the deep end? People think that disability and disability issues are something over there, but disability cuts across all races, all classes, everything, because most of it is acquired. I'm the rare exception where I'm the 25% more or less that's acquired it from birth due to genetics and other factors. So most people actually acquire it after the age of 50. In fact, it's a wee bit of a joke in the disabled community. It's not if you become disabled, it's sometimes when you become disabled, with aging and everything else. And it's also ageism ties into that. I just want you to kind of think about that if we move forward in a second to this, move forward in terms of thinking about barriers and issues and people you might lose friends and everything else that goes along with being suddenly having an impairment tomorrow by COVID-19 and jumping into this whole community and whole society, this whole thing that has been ignored. And be kind of prominent of that, of this is not, this is not like race or class or anything like that. It's very difficult for you to become like that. So I just want you to keep that in mind. Yeah. And ask, is that kind of self-ability eugenics model of like, you're not worth it? You're not worth saving? You're not worth dealing with? Because you've got no value? Just food for thought.
Thank you, Emily. Thanks very much for sharing it. It's moving to hear you speak about it. And I hope that you've touched many of the people who are listening and watching just now. I invite you to pause, check in with yourself, take a break, get some water, do whatever you need to do, and then sit with some questions that we've put together. So they're up there on the slide. The first one is to share an honest thought with yourself that you've had as a result of the conditioning that Emily's just laid out around disabled people and attitudes and narratives towards disabled people. The next question is how you think about disabled people differently and how you relate to them in a different way to how you might relate to other people who sit in a marginalized group, whether that's people identifying LGBTQ+, Black or Indigenous people of colour. And then the last question, how would you feel if you were to become disabled tomorrow, personally from COVID-19 or anything else?
This is the second half, and this is where we get into the meat and potatoes of it, which is the disability blind spot in climate and ecological activism, and how the past stuff we talked about of biases and conditioning and everything else has seeped into the activist community and the green movement, and how it's actually affecting people directly and indirectly, and how it's actually a blind spot where no one can actually see it because it's invisible. That's why, if you're asking why you would have a crash course in disability history, this is why to give context for the second half. And my main question as we move forward is, why do you not know any of this and why not? And maybe think about issues you may have in terms of why and who might have been keeping this information quiet, or what issues may arise in doing so. And as I move forward, this is just a blind spot of how the green movement neglects and ignores this particular topic. And I'll explain why this is harmful and why this is dangerous when we discuss climate and ecological crises of being erased. And this is just from a wider, also that applies to XR, but it applies to the wider movement as well. Narratives in general and environmental activism. Disabled people cannot be expected losses in the climate and ecological crisis. And this is something which is very much a problem, which I've seen in the climate and ecological thing, is that disability is completely taken off the table, and we talk about race and class and obviously gender stuff, but I feel it's incomplete, especially with the size, scale, and horrific nature of how disabled people are affected by ecological and climatic events. So I'll just let you take a moment to ask, does that sound familiar to you of expected losses? Have you had those thoughts when it's been brought up? If it's been brought up? You have to be honest with yourself and take a moment to acknowledge that disabled people are often seen as expected losses when crises happen. You may not realise it, but this is an internalised narrative of wanting to be accessible seen as an inconvenience or distracting from other oppressions. The article on the left is about people's view on disability when those issues are brought up. And a quote from that particular article, which is, "But vulnerability is dangerous. After a recent discussion of disability disaster, a colleague of mine threw his hands up. It's terrible, he told me, but what can you do? Some people aren't going to make it. Once you got over my outrage, I realised my colleague had unwittingly named a core problem facing those of us organising for climate justice. The assumption that some folks simply aren't cut out to survive." Do you want me to survive? Or do you think I'm going to be expendable like with COVID-19, that if I die, I die, and something we can do about it? Do you accept that? Or do you question that? The quote on the right is about issues of what actually happened with disabled people during this climate and ecological crisis. Meanwhile, recent media accounts have laid bare the risks. Stories of New Yorkers who were trapped in high-rise buildings for days after Hurricane Sandy. Nursing home residents in Florida who died from extreme heat after their institution failed to evacuate in advance of Hurricane Irma. Or disaster warnings that are inaccessible to deaf communities. Such stories call attention to the ways in which deaf and disabled people are especially vulnerable to climate disruption. And also, they're often invisible, talked over, and even worse, not acknowledged as a problem. For example, according to Forbes, a Forbes article, approximately 155,000 disabled people and elderly people were affected by Hurricane Katrina in 2005. Survivors of the hurricane including people with visual and physical impairments and learning disabilities. Approximately half of all deaths from Hurricane Katrina were people over the age of 75. A large number of these were people who had disabilities and health conditions that increased their vulnerability. Who's allowing you to be ignorant of this? Why is it that you have not heard about any of that with natural disasters concerning disabled people? Why is that? Why is it this is ignored, that you know nothing about it? This glaring amount of death, destruction, and suffering that goes unaccounted for and unrecognised. Does that outrage you? Make you feel sad? I am actually more upset that I actually didn't know this, even as a disability activist, And the second half of it is people not paying attention to it than actually suffering themselves. For everyone will be suffering under climate and ecological collapse, but the fact that it's ignored and not recognised. And it goes deeper than that as I continue. Or how about the fact that the UN actually had a resolution that disability people, if a world first in combating climate and ecological collapse, that disabled people and their disability rights need to be core in anything concerning climate and ecological resolutions, policies, and the like. World first, the UN Declaration around climate. Did you hear that in any newsletter? Did you know about this until I've told you? World first, UN. This is not some small op-ed or some opinion piece. This is the United Nations doing a national decree that people that are disabled should be included in climate actions. Why? Why did you not know this? Why is it there seems to be a blind spot that if there's other minorities, there's at least people asking questions, concerned about it, and if they're not included, there's people that stand up and know. Why is it when this is not even acknowledged in environmental movements or anything concerning climate and ecological disasters, we don't even know the blind spot exists? The UN, according to the UN Environmental Programme, which is a great quote from the report, disabled people will be disproportionately disadvantaged by climate change, which just discussed. They highlight 3 specific issues and outcomes that could be devastating to disabled people. So, such as disabled populations who have most likely limited access to knowledge, resources and services to effectively respond to environmental change. And 2, compromised health makes disabled people more vulnerable to extreme heat and climate events, ecosystem service losses, and infectious diseases. Those with disabilities are more likely to have difficulties in required evacuations and mitigations. In the United Nations survey, a high proportion of disabled people were found either to be injured or even die during natural disasters. This was due to lack of consultation with disabled people and governments that lacked necessity measures to support and protect them. Only 20% of respondents to the survey said they could evacuate immediately, and 6% said that they could not evacuate at all. Where's the outrage about this? Why is this not discussed? That these are hard-hitting statistics of a whole population that would actually either die or be severely injured during a case of climate and ecological collapse or catastrophe, and with past cases. When I bring this up, people think can't believe it. They think I'm over-exaggerating, I'm being hyperbolic. And yet here it is, the hard fact of disabled people basically, I'm sorry to say, being left to die. Is it acceptable that you haven't heard about this? Is it acceptable that these people are just left without being voiceless and not able to talk about? Why? And I'll give the example of us being erased from any form of discussion about climate and ecological collapse. This is not a dig on XR, but it's a symptom of problematic issues around disabled people, a huge swath of the population. In fact, the UN actually estimated 1 billion people on the planet are actually disabled in some way due to poverty, disease, and other factors. That is equivalent of the population of India being disabled in some way, being erased from the conversation. And as we go across here, we get an example of the erasure. And this is not a drill by Extinction Rebellion, which came out late last year. Did you know that disability is not even mentioned once in any of its pages whatsoever? And it's euphemistically called people that are affected by austerity, whatever the hell that even means. They have a whole chapter on a person that's gay talking about LGBT issues, which is, I admire, very well and good as a queer woman. And they talk about race, gender, and class as mentioned. Disability is nowhere to be seen. We're not even seen as an oppressed group, and more so after me discussing actual real and documented oppression and suffering under the hands of governments and institutions do not take us into account of the immense suffering of disabled people. I felt outraged, angry, and sad. My struggling, even people when my friends and people I know personally and others have been affected negatively by the recent flooding in the UK alone, and those of my colleagues and friends in the United States. And it's written out of history, written out of concern. How would it make you feel if that was you? For me, it made me feel hopeless, despairing. It made me feel that my life did not matter if I died in a natural ecological disaster, because I am not a group which has been socially and economically seen as valuable for whatever reason in the environmental movement, not seen of political and even social concern, in terms of activism and justice. It makes me feel that my personal struggles are really issues to be ignored and devalued. Not worth mentioning. But here's a more pertinent question. Why did none of these statistics and these issues make it into the book? Look into these other, why is it that many people didn't even realize a whole group of people was omitted, as if we talked about the expected oppressions we discussed? Why is this? This is what makes me upset. It is not, and as George Orwell once said, it is not what is said which is the problem, it is what omitted. And what is omitted is an entire class of people suffering, erased from any and all conversation. And when they are, they're often denigrated, devalued, and also a whole host of other issues of getting shut down and told to basically you're being over emotional and you're taken away from other people's oppressions, when I'm not even mentioned in any and all of these issues. But sadly, we're just beginning the problems in the many different facets and layers of this particular problem, which affects me and many other of my friends and colleagues, both in Extinction Rebellion and in many other green environmental movements across up and down the country and indeed the world. About protect the earth at all costs. So many people here know about eco-fascism. That is the idea that with ecological and climate collapse would be a fascism with an ecological bent on protecting the planet and protecting the nation being intertwined, and using it to enact authoritarian and restrictive policies. Eco-ableism or eco-disableism is when policies by ecological advocates, movements, and others make policies, advocate for things, and so on, for things that affect disabled people directly or indirectly, negatively, and even hurt them. Or, sadly, blame disabled people or denigrate disabled people for not being greener. This is a case in point. Asthma's carbon footprint as big as eating meat. Why does focus on asthma? And the irony is that a lot of people are asthmatic because of air pollution. But the real question is, why are you asking people, if in this case asthma, for greener medications? For being environmentally friendly? Isn't this a bit obtuse and a bit ridiculous that someone that's suffering from an impairment and actually that particular medication, we only work for them, and we have tried other medications to control their asthma and other respiratory problems, to then be told, yes, that one's too polluting, you need to go for another one and risk your life and risk your health for the sake of not feeling guilt tripped into from protecting the planet. Does this sound like a good idea to you? The bad asthmatics with their inhalers are destroying the world? Do you think it's ridiculous and rather kind of condescending and also victim blaming for disabled people that have done nothing wrong being blamed of and having been coerced to be greener and less wasteful? This is eco-ableism. This policy seems to be doing the good thing when really it's throwing people that are disabled under the bus. The fact is, this is not a solution to the climate and ecological crisis, and deep down we know this. But we could maybe rationalise there might be a reason for it. There isn't any reason for it. It's to oppress and make people suffer in the name of environmental and ecological safety. And that is it. It is a low blow for disabled people. It's toxic, and this is the problem. If you let this slide, disabled people will suffer in order to make the world safe and green for able people. That is actually the value system underpinning this, and they must be challenged at every moment. This is other examples of eco-ableism. They look innocent on the surface. Dig deeper, we begin to realise that these policies are completely ignoring disabled people's ideas and actually notions of self-integrity and what is actually needed for them. The singular notion that all waste, even necessary waste, must be destroyed and abandoned for the sake of the planet. For example, on the left-hand side, use evolving doors to save energy, and yet it's for disabled people. What does that say? What is that implying? That if you use it, you shouldn't really use it. You're only letting you use it because you're disabled and using energy which is maybe harming the planet. It's mixed messages here. It's really weird. But the one on the right is the one that really got my goat. This is from Twitter, and there was a whole campaign where Whole Greaves, which is now part of Amazon, and Whole Foods, had pre-peeled oranges. And there's a whole campaign of it seen as wasteful. And as you see here, as the quote, if only nature could find a way to cover these oranges so we didn't need to waste so much plastic on them. On the surface, that may seem like a good idea. But let's take a step back. What if you've got hand-eye coordination issues, arthritis, a whole bunch of issues where you cannot physiologically peel an orange? What if, for example, you don't want to peel an orange? You don't have to deal with the peeling and everything and all the rest of it, of peeling the orange peel off and having to deal with that and the mess. But no, it's the plastic. The plastic is the problem. And when disabled people called it out, and people feel we actually need that, they were ignored and denigrated. And they actually banned them. Something that, in some cases, can be very useful for disabled people to actually live independent lives and enjoy fruit, was seen as wasteful and unnecessary by those privileged enough to not actually need it and think it's unnecessary. This is going to be controversial. This is partly an attack on a straw ban, but it's actually really the ideas behind it. But the real question is, when you see this, is what does this pick make you feel and why? You see, I agree with parts of the straw ban. We need to reduce our waste. But the way in which we are doing it, especially how it affects disabled people, after the examples above, gives me of grave concern. The fact is that paper straws dissolve, which becomes useless for disabled people. The fact is that disabled people need them as access. People with disability issues need them to drink, not just food, but other fluids, and just kind of live an independent life, going out and about, because it's insulated and all the rest of it. The fact is that there may be a convenience device for you, and if they are, that means you're privileged. You do not need it to survive, to eat, to have dignity. But what's seen as a convenience is a necessity for people's access. Basically, the issue is that when you ban them completely, you are saying to disabled people, we are so privileged, we cannot see how you can possibly need them. And for example, in Canada, when disabled people were consulted on the issues of the plastic straw ban, and all the recommendations were ignored, and they banned it completely. It is now illegal in Canada to even import straw bans. You'll be fined for trying to import straws from overseas. I've got friends who have been stockpiling thousands and thousands of plastic straws in the event of the plastic straw ban, as nothing else works, as other straws do not have the same qualities as needed for disabled people. Is there ways to work around it and deal with it? Yes, there is. But an outright ban is basically condemning disabled people. There's a status quo is what I'm going after. And this is a problem. We have not questioned the social aspects and how this actual policy affects other people. We are singly focused on the environmental issues and forgetting the wider problems that this can cause. If we need an example, here it is. This has actually happened. A disabled woman accidentally impaled herself with a metal straw. She died instantly. She had a condition that made her faint. And sadly, where she was encouraged to, and it's in the UK, in Broadsmere. The myth is that we are beyond discrimination of disabled people in terms of the environmental movement. The thing is, we need to think visible risk. Is someone being killed for their disability because they can't get a plastic straw worth it if the status quo of how we actually view and have the lotus of straw bans? The fact is that a British woman died after doing this, and she was 60, and she had an issue, and she collapsed into November 2018, and the 10-inch stainless steel straw penetrated her left eye into her brain, and she died. And the coroner reported death as an accident. Yet, no one's addressing this issue. I've seen people defend it as a necessary cost for a clean world. What does that say when someone says that to you, to your own face? Or that's an unfortunate accident, but I think it's worth it for straws to be banned? To my face, and I won't name names. How does that make you feel if someone were to say that to you? When you're very calmly but passionately saying there needs to be another way to deal with this waste, this issue, than throwing disabled people under the bus for the sake of preserving the status quo. For a tiny percentage, 0.004% of all plastic in the ocean and all plastic waste being plastic straws. I've heard all the other bullshit that's been put in defense of this, of the status quo. Well, it's not really needed, it's not really necessary, and all the rest of it, which I've debunked when disabled people actually need it. And you still continue with it. You're saying disabled people are not part of a movement or society which is sustainable. You as a person are not sustainable and harmful to the planet. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound like a world you want to live in if this is the end result? And like I said, with other incidents I've had on this particular point, the fact is this is standard practice in the green movement and the current redress for disabled people. And it has to stop. And even when we talk about depressions, we're nowhere to be found, especially internal trainings in the green movement and even in the left. The fact is that intersectionality that does not take the time to understand disability and its unique nuances and just lumps it in with everything else, fails to give it the proper respect. The fact of the matter is, when we talk about gender or we talk about race, we give ample time for the subtleties of race and gender, and then when we're talking about intersectionality, we then know the difference between race and gender and how they intersect, how they interact in a complex social and political and economic ways. But the fact is that disability prejudice and how disability is viewed is very much ignored, denigrated, gaslighting, and everything, all other forms of psychological ways have been put onto me of basically not going to deal with it. It's talked about, but no one wants to really deal with it. In fact, if you believe that all oppressors in the modern era, that actually come from ableism, the eugenics movement. Who is right, who's fit and unfit, racism, sexism, and all the rest of it comes from the idea that some people are more able than others and more able to be part of society than others. It's the othering to gain power by pressing and taking and standing on others. The fact is that there's a history of ignorance and lack of accessibility at my intersectionality workshop. In fact, it was not accessible. I had to actually PM and DM the actual workshop. I had to explain that I'm actually a link, and actually this and actually it's hopelessly inaccessible. And when I get in, I had to explain my Tourette's and other conditions so that I would not be oppressed or even have issues when going in. Whenever we talked about disability, people were so ignorant of it, they didn't even realise what disability was. In fact, people would see doing whataboutism. That is, say, when someone was talking about a particular topic, I would talk about disability, and they would say that I'm diverting or basically making an agenda of my own doing. When really, everyone's ignorant about disability, and we show the intersectional. You'd accept disability narratives from disabled people and understanding the difference. Needless to say, I'm feeling alone, isolated, and ignored. My whole history, the whole idea and concept of the social model disability, and of course, the model of disabled people being actually oppressed for millennia, in fact, or even for centuries, didn't even register. Then how can you talk about intersectionality of a disabled queer person, disabled black person, a disabled woman, but you don't even understand Disability 101, which I briefly talked about in the beginning of this talk. If you don't even have the basics of like that, how can you talk about disability? How can you understand disability? It's a sham. And sadly, it will be seen as a sham for me and many others until disability is not just a seat at the table, but respected as a proper oppression and proper issue and political and economic issue like every other one, race, gender, and class. Until that happens, it is a sham and hollow. And sadly, even when disabled people feel the pull to go to protests, we are treated with the most shocking and degrading treatment imaginable. The fact is that this is real. All of it is real. It is not hyperbolic. The one on the right is the Manchester police with anti-fracking protesters. These are people that joined the Green Movement to attack and be against the fossil fuel industry. And they were kicked, punched, knocked unconscious, tipped out the wheelchairs, and in fact, they were targeting by police. In fact, the police were so bad they actually had a formal investigation into it. A formal investigation into the treatment of it. And many officers were charged with hate crimes against disabled people. Did you hear about this in the mainstream news? Or any of your circles? Like I said above, it's almost like me being a broken record. Why? Why is it when disabled people are absolutely fucked over by the police, abused to the point where even the Human Rights Commission in the UK had to get involved? And police admit officers have no guidance on when to pass protest info to DWP. What does that mean, Emily? Well, it means if you go to a protest, you risk your benefits getting cut. Economic sanctions for going to a protest. Imagine that. Imagine going, and it's equivalent to you getting a fine or getting your, if you're a working person, of getting your paycheck docked because you went to a protest. Would that upset people if that happened to them? You go to protest and all of a sudden, oh, I got docked. Your employer found out. No, it wouldn't be acceptable. But something like acceptable in this society for that to happen, to have the economic sanction of disabled people because they have the audacity to go to a protest. Sadly, when I talked about warnings, XR and other activist groups, about the possible abuse by police in this manner, issue of understanding the truth been seen to be overreacting, how the Green Movement does not address these issues. These are anti-fracking protesters that were disabled. Why? Why were they not taken seriously? And often they were not defended by many groups. It was talked about and then water under the bridge. Next slide, please. We should not and should not run away or indeed move away from the issue of the XR rebellion in October. This may, of course, got buried by the Section 14 orders that applied to all of XR members in October. But the fact is that this was the worst case of disability discrimination in police history of disabled people. Not since the early 1990s have police acted in this way to disabled people on record. The fact is that when the police confiscated the kit, especially the week beforehand, 2/3 of that kit before the main event, before the main rebellion in October, was disability kit. Did you know about that? Did anyone talk about the fact that most of it was a disability kit, which I worked very hard to get? The fact of the matter is that when we've protested outside Scotland Yard to give it back, a legal seizure of access kits, portaloos and other equipment, as you can see on the left-hand side here, wheelchairs, we were arrested under Section 14. In fact, it was so discriminatory. My friend Nikki, in the middle there, with red hair, and in the left-hand and the right-hand side here as well, under the new Scotland Yard logo, was arrested because her carer came in to help her out with oxygen and other care needs. And because under Section 14, 2 or more people are seen as a legal assembly, therefore because of a carer came in and others that had the same treatment and the same issue, they got arrested for breaching Section 14. In other words, it's fine for an able-bodied person to do it, but as soon as you're disabled, you need a carer, it's an illegal assembly. The fact is that this could have been prevented or even understood as a possibility, but it wasn't. The fact of the matter is that we started that protest outside Scotland Yard. Disabled people started that protest. We begged, pleaded with XR Twitter and XR Facebook and others to show what's actually happened and explained at great depth of what actually happened to disabled rebels. Only when Twitter got involved did people begin to realise the scale and scope of the actual proper hardcore oppression of disabled people by the police, manhandling and confiscation illegally, even of personal equipment, wheelchairs, canes, a whole host of problems. And yet, apart from some Facebook posts and a stream, it wasn't in any newsletter, but there was plenty of media reports about what happened. There was no official statement of XR Rebellion, or even XR Main Movement of Scotland, or even XR UK about what really happened, and admitting mistakes were made. The fact is that they were disability-led, and the Solidarity March that came afterwards was pretty much piggybacked on disabled people after they discovered it on Twitter. In fact, many didn't even know what was going on, and that's in the second slide I'll explain later. But the fact is, that was remote support when all this was happening. And I had to tell a mum with an autistic child that because of what's happened now, and due to lack of training and other supports, and no safe places, nothing, the fact is that we only had one weighted blanket and new defenders. We have nothing else, no other supports. And I cried. I sobbed. I haven't sobbed in years. That could have been me if it was done 10, 15 years ago with my mum taking me. But no, they had to turn away. They had to go home due to this situation. A passionate young man that wanted to go, denied. And many others in my disability group on Facebook and others were begging that wish they could go, but because the access kit was taken and the way the police have been kicking and abusing disabled people and in custody, they refused to go for their own personal safety. So don't you dare see anyone at all ever say, oh, we didn't see any disabled people, why should we need access for disabled people? Because When you have access, disabled people come. It's an oxymoron. Build it and they will come. The fact is that we have a rhetoric that because not many disabled people can't go, then we say there's no point for accessibility. Because there's accessibility, disabled people are discouraged from coming. It becomes a vicious cycle. And the fact is, this ignorance is not just lethal, it is also, at the very least, damaging to our physical and mental well-being. We feel left alone to defend ourselves. The fact is that when the Solidarity March is a sham, the fact is, where are you now under COVID-19 powers and everything else when I get silenced? No, you don't care. You really don't actually care, really, as a structure. Look at those faces, look at these people. And yet, when disabled people ask for access, ask for supports, ask for solidarity, and even talk about issues in terms of, I explained in the beginning of this part of the presentation, of extreme death, destruction, and neglect in environmental issues of public governments and agencies to protect disabled people in the climate disasters and ecological disasters. We are ignored and denigrated. This is pandering. This is paternalistic in going, oh, the poor disabled people, they wanted to come and protest and they look like nasty police. Simplistic, over, and of course, it all became about them very quickly in my own personal interactions and altercations and people that were there. The fact is, they were looking at him, our friend Edward here, inspirational. The fact is, the issue is not being taken seriously in the rest of XR after this. No newsletter, only Twitter posts, an occasional thing on Facebook. That is it. No official statement, no official time in which we will talk about in a debrief taking a disabled rebels and how to improve actions moving forward. We were rushed into the carpet as a bad incident we wish to forget. This was the worst incident. People quit the police force because of the state of how the disabled people were treated on that action. That's how bad it was. I've got articles relating to the fact that the European Court of Human Rights did an actual probe into the Metropolitan Police, how it treated disabled people specifically. How come we didn't hear about this? How come you don't know? How come it's not in a newsletter and talked about with seriousness? And this is the problem. It is unfortunate that these things happen and you move on. This is unacceptable. There's no substantial understanding in trying to understand disabled lives and issues. This is the problem. In fact, I've actually had examples of hate crime in XR. My friend Edward here, of course, had an XR problem with the Durham action, where he was actually, it was non-accessible, and he had issues with people name-calling him and calling them actual disabled slurs and all the rest of it. And nothing was done. And when he talked about accessibility, in terms of can they get in with a wheelchair, he was basically said, sorry, you don't have anything but people like you. In a Durham action in February. How does that make you feel? And there's other cases which is personal for him, which I won't spread here. And I've had other cases and issues myself, overreacting. And of course, when I did the share, no one in the debrief what actually happened, no one came up to me. A couple of friends did, yes, but no one else did. Apart from Link members and one other person explained the whole situation that happened down south with the Solidarity March sham. And you're not willing to put the work in. Isn't that wonderful? Because for the pity party bullshit happening, just like as of our charity case, you can see the values in embedded conditioning at work here. You don't really want to care. You don't really care in a situation, sadly. You don't know how to care properly for disabled people. And this has to change. This is one of the 10 principles of Extinction Rebellion. Accept everyone and every part of everyone. But if you make things inaccessible, if you shut people down, gaslit, and ignore and denigrate disabled people when you're talking about real, tangible issues How can you talk about unconditional acceptance when really it's conditional acceptance of being able-bodied and neurotypical, non-autistic, non-having mental health issues, etc.? The fact of the matter is, it's rhetoric. Unless we actually do something about the structures and values that we are unconsciously and consciously accept. The fact of the matter is that I have been discriminated directly and indirectly in XR due to my neurological condition, and yet there's been no policy, nothing for XR and similar activist groups throughout the UK to deal and the world to deal with these issues. The fact of the matter is that until we take disability as a proper issue to be dealt with and have practical solutions to, which I'll talk about in my next talk, it will not be welcome to everybody. You're not an ally to disabled people if you host events that are not accessible and have an inaccessible culture. The fact of the matter is that if I'm ignored or seen as that I need to grow a thicker skin of people reacting to me being disabled, that is enabling that to continue. You're blaming the victim, when really, you should not blame the victim. You should say that that's unacceptable. And of course, my personal favourite, next slide, of the super crip within the environmental movement is Greta Thunberg. The problem is that she's seen as an exceptional disabled person. She's autistic and got OCD and other issues, and yet she's doing it despite being disabled. The fact of the matter is that XR, when the co-founders XR was on, and actually did not defend Greta Thunberg from Rab's attack, an ad hominem attack from Piers Morgan interview a number of months ago. She said she's a wonderful person, but did not address the character assassination and the use of disability to denigrate and of course attack a girl that happens to be passionate about this particular topic, using her autism and hyper focus and are passionate about certain topics to do it. There's also another issue. She's deified and no other people have seen because of this. It's really disturbing. The fact of the matter is that no one has ever had in both NXR or even the Green Movement, and if there is, I stand corrected. But from what I've seen, there's not been an official statement from the Green Movement officially condemning people on the right and the mainstream media from attacking her because of her odd behaviour and atypical movements, not staring people in the eye, and all the rest of it because of her autism, and accepting her as a diverse human being in the climate and ecological emergency, and speaking out as a young person, and accepting her as she is, defending her and her right to be different, but not less. No. But you're very much happy to bring her along to talks and trainings. You're very much happy for her to be on a world stage. Heaven forbid, when you want to do backing of her, there's none to be found. There's silence, complicit silence. Apart from op-ed here and a think piece there, there's no unified actual letter to the Green Movement, to others, to stop this. Why is that? If she was another minority and getting the same crap, do you think people would defend her? Do you think that there would be an outrage? There would be, at very least, a discussion, don't you think, about how to deal with this? If you can't even defend someone who's a top person, a person that is a passionate, a visible, disabled person, whether she identifies it or not, she's disabled by society, then you're failing. If you do even accept the fact that she is getting attacked and her needs, her differences squat at, institutionalized. The fact of the matter is, until we own up and accept everybody and defend those that often struggle to defend themselves, like Greta sometimes does, we will have trouble. The fact of the matter is, if we say we protect our own, that there's no better example than Greta Thunberg. Either you are or you aren't. And I see a lot of aren't. Why? Why is this, the whole talk I've just discussed, why is this a acceptable state of affairs? There's a certain part of it where it's ignorance. There's also certain parts that's basically bigotry against disabled people, directly or indirectly, and uncaring, indifference against disabled people. And sometimes indifference is the worst thing of all. Thank you. Gandhi once said, truth is not measured by mass appeal. The fact of the matter is that it's not a matter of priority, it is a matter that this is your priority. This is a requirement of the system you want to build. The fact of the matter is that I have been traumatized, I've relapsed with my mental illness, I have been felt more abandoned, more alone than any other time I've felt in a long time in my life. I have felt that that not just that the whole world will be better off, but the people that are trying to make the world better don't even want me. How do you think that would make you feel? All of the above. Makes you feel upset, confused, defensive, as I'm seeing here. But it's me being defensive of me wanting to be part of it, to be a real proper member of XR in the Green Movement without all this bullshit and bigotry and baggage. It's about me being able to step in and do what I wanted to do, to be an environmental activist, not be seen as a disabled person being disabled. The fact is that I am one person, one disabled person, and I don't have the power. You all have the power. You have to be disability allies. The fact of the matter is that I can't do this anymore on my own. I do not want to be in hospital. I do not want it to affect my physical and mental well-being, dealing with the barriers, value systems, and just outright indifference and bigotry towards me, getting shut down, getting ignored, and all the rest of it. You're going to do so much. I'm only human, though some would say I'm subhuman. And this is why I made this talk. And I hope it's touched you, and I hope it's made you think, have food for thought. The fact of the matter is that my anger, frustration, and upset come to a real place, but I do not want this to be a thing anymore. I want this to be inclusive. I want this movement to move past its petty bollocks on disability and accessibility and own up to its mistakes and issues that it's made as a whole movement and community. No less and no more. Then we can move forward. The fact is, I want to be heard, and I want the understanding that disability is not hard. It is how society and the state reacts that is hard. People considering it not an oppression and not as bad as other oppressions are the problem. You're perpetuating the idea that disability is a dirty word, and disability should never, ever be talked about because it makes you feel uncomfortable. Good. Gay people were seen as uncomfortable 20, 30 years ago to talk about in public. Feminism, you name it, black people. Why is this any different? The fact of the matter is, I wish it wasn't this way. Wish I wasn't so traumatized by all this in the movement, but I am. I hope this finds you well. I just want to conclude that this is not aimed as an attack in the environmental movement. If criticism is seen as an attack, we've got a lot of work to do in the movement. If simple criticism in pointing the mirror up causes such discern and issues of ego. I'll leave it here, and I'll open it up to questions and answers, and I hope many questions have been opened up to you.